Thank you for the very, very warm welcome. Everybody in the back can hear me, I hope. Awesome. If that changes, do let me know. I am really glad to be one of you. This is probably one of my favorite places to be, and in a little bit, I will kind of explain why. But first, why is there music playing? Okay, can you guys hear that? If not, don't worry. So, talking to some of my team yesterday, they had said I could make this Keynote Beta 1.0. So I am going to do that, and in the spirit, because I kept hearing great things all week and I kept changing my Keynote a little bit here, a little bit there. So much in the spirit of the lightning talks and Anthony Skopatz's talk, this is kind of going to be a choose your own adventure Keynote, but yeah, it's still beta, so there's not really multiple paths. There's just one path. But you get to participate. I'm glad that we remembered to thank folks. In 2014 at SciPy, I actually brought my college daughter with me here. And at some point in one of the sessions, I think it was like, how do we improve the feel of the conference and inclusion? And I had said, well, you know, common courtesies like hi, and you know, and at that point the whole room burst out laughing because they're like, we're introverts, we're scientists, we don't say hi. And I'm like, I think you can do it, and I think we've succeeded. It is my pleasure to see so many different faces and such enthusiasm and kindness this week. And for that, I really thank the committees and the chairs and all of you for the spirit that you're showing. One thing, the sprints are one of my absolute favorite things, and it is one of the best ways to learn something new. And I am there to answer the most basic, simple question. If you don't know Git or you don't know GitHub, I will sit with you until you feel comfortable doing it. So please don't be intimidated. If you're on the fence as to whether or not you should go, because you will up-level your skills more than you could possibly imagine sitting there right now. Okay, so since we're going to refactor that program at a later date, uncertainty. What is uncertainty? Well, uncertainty is when I have imperfect or unknown information, yet I must take some action. And as such, in this community, uncertainty gives rise to inquiry. So on days when I'm thinking about projects, the present, and how my actions might influence others tomorrow, I go down to the tide pool. This is my place to work through the uncertainty of things. It's the seaside tide pool in Cardiff, not Cardiff, UK, but Cardiff in northern San Diego. And I go down there to look at the ecosystem, and I'm reminded of its complexity and its simplicity. I observe the changes over time as the tide goes in and out, the impact on the ecosystem of a random wave crashing over the reef that changes the predictable flow of water. As I stand there and look at that small section of the reef, I ponder the questions that I face in everyday life. Do I use pip or conda? Is a dictatorship, anarchy, or a trusted council the best way to steward Python's future? Would any of these work for Jupyter's future governance? How long do we support our projects? Or should it become end of life? And when Python 2 goes end of life at the end of this year, will I be chased by a mob with pitchforks, or will we be given a party to celebrate? Alas, it may be both. But there is another question that often comes up, and that's how do we fund open source? Can we pull together businesses, research, and education for mutual benefit? How do we continue innovating and sustaining if funding doesn't come through? And why does the topic of funding open source projects often make my brain hurt? So sometimes an answer comes to me. Other times I can only look down and observe. What I see in the tide pool is complex. It is a complex, interrelated ecosystem, not too different from our ecosystem of scientific libraries and tools. Looking closer, I can inspect the anemone in more detail. I can observe its behavior. As I ponder the questions from everyday life, more questions arise. I ask myself, what can I observe? What is known? What is unknown? Am I making assumptions about what will happen over time? Or do I see evidence of a change? So we all come with motivations, and our motivations for being here may differ, whether we're researcher, educator, developer, business person, or nonprofit, but we're all trying to change something in the world. We have differing goals and definitions of success. How can we understand these differences and find similarities as well? Our individual needs and relationships with others that we build operate as a complex ecosystem which reflects our understanding of information and our trust of each other. Looking at my individual motivations and what will benefit the group, like open source projects, a tide pool ecosystem operates based on its complex relationship between individual living things. Now, one of the things that I really enjoy reading about is economics, and I've done a few talks about how economics could influence how we fund open source. Often, Eleanor Ostrom's work on the commons, which is wonderful, is mentioned as a way to sustain things. I also believe Eric von Hippel's work on innovation and the importance of innovation is also very important. And today I'm going to talk a little bit more about a Nobel Prize winner in economics, John Torol, who has written amazing things about our ecosystem and how we can use modern economics, which is different than economics of the past, to actually build new products, serve our users, and hopefully get funding along the way, and do it in, a shout out to Rachel, an ethical way. So similar to the tide pool, open source projects are impacted by a number of factors: uncertainty, information, ecosystem, learning, discovery, motivation, economics. And after many visits to this tide pool over the past year, I think I found what I believe to be the basic elements of successful open source innovation. While funding, community, performance, and quality are important, I believe that transparency of information stands out as the most critical success factor for open source scientific computing today. Why? Because research has shown that transparency of information builds trust between us. It builds optimism about the future, and it gives us a willingness to take action. So I want to share with you a little bit of a thought journey, so part of the Choose Your Own Adventure 1.0, and that I went on to kind of come to this conclusion over the last several months. And when I talk about open sourced scientific tools, I believe they should always be open. And when I mean open, I mean transparency of information, source code, communications, governance. So our journey begins with two questions. Can an upstart or a small underdog come out of nowhere to dominate a giant? And if so, how? So we're going to start with a small group of people similar to us who have a variety of talents, people interested in improving the world, using research and technology to do so. And we also have some large corporations like Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, who have a concentration of power and scale and a lot of eyeballs on the information that they collect. And I think in some ways, those platforms are a double-edged sword. They bring us some wonderful things and the ability to communicate and scale our communities. But like Rachel had mentioned yesterday, there's a lot of ethics, and they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart or for free. The information that they have is what is valued to them. So in addition to the large corporations, there's some new technologies out there that let us do all these cool things: GPUs, deep learning libraries, JavaScript, Kubernetes, and coming on the horizon, WebAssembly as well. So can we, as a small group or a community, compete against the large corporations, or can we partner with them in some way? And how can we use these technologies that we're developing to do so? So in a little bit of a plot twist, I want to go back and rewind 30 years. And I'm 53, so 30 years, you know, I was probably around the age of some of you. And 1989 was a really interesting time. It was a time of great change, and in many ways, it feels very similar to 2019. In Tiananmen Square, there were protests. Japan was starting a new emperor, and it was also a turning point in political history in the Eastern Bloc. And later in that year, the Berlin Wall fell, which was a profound change in the world as well. The Dalai Lama won the Nobel Prize. Hurricane Hugo, for those of you that are weather folks, caused $8 billion in damages. We had mini crashes of the stock market, and, you know, for the Californians in the room, a 6.9 earthquake in San Francisco called the Loma Prieta quake. So hopefully we're done with those in LA. 1989 also would profoundly, now that we view it in hindsight, change us forever on a technical field. Dial-up was finally available in North America. Internet was in its infancy at CERN. The World Wide Web was only a draft document at this point. And fortunately, our mobile phones were now less than 3.2 kilograms, which, you know, it was still weighed in about 12 ounces, but better than the boulders that we carried around before. So we also had large corporations, and they were different in they were more transactional and more product-based than some of the platform companies today. Some are still on the list, like Apple and Microsoft. Others were HP, IBM, AT&T. And back to the question about the small group of people. Can an upstart or a small underdog come out of nowhere to dominate a field where giants have had little success? It doesn't happen often, but that's precisely what Octal Communications Corp had done by finding a niche where the big guys had goofed and filling it with ingenious technology. Our small group, as a member of Octal, worked very hard to change communications within businesses and take advantage of the rapidly growing but very young cellular technology. Yes, we were making voicemail and voice automated services, and for that I apologize now to you, but it was a way that us as a startup could have, with a laser focus on quality and empowering people's ability to communicate. It was a really good thing at the time. Email was not as prevalent as it is now, so people were moving from their telephone answering machines that you had to press play and then wait for the tape to rewind or go forward. And at this point, the industry, when Octal entered it, was dominated by large corporations like AT&T, but the market was growing at 50% a year by some estimates. Propelled by our sale of products to the Bell companies that had just broken up the year before, Octel became the largest manufacturer of voicemail systems in 1988, just 4 years after offering its first product. And in 1 year, we grew from 19 million to 48 million. And in 3 more years, we were at 160 million. And the nearest competitor at the time was AT&T, and they were making 140 million. So why do I share that? Well, I think there's some parallels and some similarities to our own ecosystem. And I think one of the things that made Octel one of the admired high-quality companies was our mission. And I don't expect you to read that, but I have a few snippets of it. Our president and founder and CEO, Bob Cohn, had a profound belief in being humane to people. And it showed in how the company was organized and structured. We valued our customers, and internally, we viewed our other groups as customers of ours. With people, we were encouraged to make mistakes and then fix them. And we succeeded as a team together. And ethics was part of that mission statement, which was unusual for the time. And we respected our ethical obligations, and winning was only acceptable if we won fairly and honestly. So in essence, it was people before things. And as an example of some of the innovative things that was happening at that time, there was 100% participation in the stock option plans. That meant every single employee of the company was part of that plan. Whether you were cleaning the floors in the evening or you were the top developer, you got options to use. We were also one of the first companies to offer AIDS educations to our employees, and something that I hope that we can achieve, at least in my lifetime, again, is universal medical coverage, including pre-existing conditions. So it's possible. So our teams were working in uncharted waters. The cellular phone market was just starting, and the telephone companies were just getting started offering voicemail instead of the hardware answering machine. We had no script to follow, no crystal ball to tell us what to build. We focused on people and their core need for voice communications. We bounced ideas around on whiteboards about how to make communication asynchronous, efficient, and easy for you. As teams, we worked together. We shared information freely, both good news and bad news. We rallied for each other when something went wrong or folks needed an extra hand. We bonded over then what was a great Silicon Valley perk, a 3 p.m. popcorn break, where we were expected to stop working for 15 minutes and spend time socializing. Overall, our personal success was tied to how the team, group, and company performed. And the end of that story in 1997 was Octel was acquired by Lucent Technologies for $1.8 billion. At the time of the deal, voicemail services, which included fax and email as well, was $2.3 billion in sales and was anticipated to keep growing by 20% per year. Our commitment to transparent information built a deep level of trust in each other and with our executives. The trust extended out also to our customers. It's my belief that a small, ethical, and focused group can achieve big things by sharing information to build trust. So one more stop on our journey is the year 2014. Some of you were here, back at SciPy in 2014. It was a different place. Conda Forge didn't exist. Docker was in its first production 1.0 release at the end of that year. IPython notebooks were gaining in popularity. Jupyter Hub didn't exist. TensorFlow was in its infancy, and Python 2 was the dominant version even in the sciences. So also at SciPy 2014, there were some new faces. This was the first SciPy that Lorena Barba attended and gave a keynote on, and we all cheered about trying to make IPython notebooks the killer app And Jupyter was born at that conference and to be more inclusive of other languages beyond Python. Also what happened was there was a breakout BOF about IPython and Jupyter that Fernando and Brian organized. And the thing I remember most about it is them asking what things we needed, the audience needed. They were gracious. I was probably one of the very few women in there, and not from the scientific academic world. And they were gracious enough to seek out my feedback and the information that I had, since I had been teaching with those notebooks for about 1.5 years at that point. So now let's come back to 2019. We always open refers to the source code primarily, yet always open has a strong place in governance and community as it helps to build trust at different levels. This is the Jupyter team. I want to just give them a quick shout out as part of the intermission. And then I also want to give a shout out for all of the different projects that are in our ecosystem. When I refer to Jupyter, I'm really talking about all of these things, and there's many more than there was in 2014. And happily, I see more phenomenal growth on the horizon and many more ideas to explore. So let's take a moment and talk about being open for learning and why that's important. Open standards, which Jupyter is the open standard, de facto open standard for the notebook format, protocol, and language. It gives students the ability to open notebooks in different front ends and be served by a variety of environments, which leads us, by having these open, even if de facto standards, to more innovation and learning, to suit different populations that have different needs. So for example, in some foreign countries, internet access is not great or computers are very expensive. It needs to work on mobile. So let's tailor our solutions to different populations. Being open lets us share knowledge. Some of you in this room helped co-write a book on teaching and learning in Jupyter, and as well as the Journal of Open Source Education, which helps spread the knowledge that we already have. When we look at adoption of these tools and teaching, there was a very interesting, at SIGSI this year, there was a very interesting paper about why CS faculty adopt new teaching practices, and it's really pretty grassroots. Conversations with another faculty member, presenting at a conference or a workshop at their own institution. Now, access is something that I think is really important, and something that, well, there's a little video there, but basically, if the video were to play, it would show, oh, and now it is playing, okay. A very good friend of mine and a professor, Dr. Anne-Marie Thomas, does wonders with her students in terms of making engineering and entrepreneurship accessible. And what she has done is combined music and code. She has had her students develop curriculum for other deaf students. And basically, through empathy, they're able to design past that machine-like experience and open up new possibilities for creative programming. And we're seeing the same thing in our community, and I think that's great. Also, scaling access is really important. Shout out to Rachel and Jeremy for Fast AI and helping us educate large groups of people that perhaps couldn't afford to go to MIT or are in a different stage of their life, but yet want to know the information. And I think that the benefits of the notebook have really proven strong in that area. Global connection with the carpentries, and thank you for anybody who is a carpentries person. So being always open for learning means that innovation, knowledge sharing, adoption and access, scaling access, and global connection are all possible. Now, if I look more at research and discovery, Binder has been a huge benefit for sharing information that folks collaborate on. And a shout out to the folks in the picture, as well as Andrew Osheroff and Jeremy Freeman, who did the original version of Binder and inspired the Jupyter community to embrace the service and continue growing its usage. A fantastic paper that I would highly encourage all researchers that are using notebooks to read is one that Adam Rule and friends wrote, and it's 10 simple rules for reproducible research in Jupyter notebooks. And the rules are fairly straightforward, and to make it even better, they have a GitHub repo that has guides that actually show what they're talking about. So you can kind of fork or clone and be on your way. In research, we know citations is really important. And it's something that we need to continue to emphasize with our projects. You folks are doing great work. We want people to recognize that great work. The citations for Jupyter were pretty small in 2015 and 2016, but definitely have accelerated and hopefully will continue to do so. Publishing, I think there were a number of conversations while we were here about publishing, and I won't go too far into it, but there is definitely a shift, and how this shift will play out, I don't know, but one thing I do know is that open journals are going to be more important. And if you just look at the economics of an open journal like the Journal of Open Source Software, it is far more economical to not have things behind a paywall and to be able to share it widely. When it comes to open research collaboration, what we're seeing now is projects that had been proprietary projects or hidden in a lab being exposed out to the greater public. And this particular example, there's a project called OpenMCT, which is a visualization library for mission control technologies in the space world that NASA and JPL had developed. And they've written a great paper, actually two, one about why they open sourced it, and the second one here is the actual impact, measurable impact, that open sourcing it had on their project. All right, so the other thing that's critically important is funding the essential software, and I am really pleased to say that we finally have funders looking at the things that we need to do to sustain the projects and grow our communities. And thank you to Chan Zuckerberg for offering this grant. I highly encourage everyone in this room to apply, so hopefully you can stuff their email box. And if you want more information, Jeremy's talk should be up in a day or so, and I encourage you to watch it. So what impact does open information have on our world? Well, one of the things we're seeing more and more are user innovators. People that aren't motivated by money, but are in fact motivated more by their own personal circumstances and the fact that open source tools and software and hardware are available. NIH actually has a 3D printing exchange where people can post their open source plans and good things come out of it. Like a young girl who has a physical handicap is able to play violin, which is pretty cool. And not only she can do it, but other people can do it. And I know when I was working at the Fab Lab in San Diego, which is a nonprofit community makerspace, we had people making artificial hands, We had a lot of folks coming back from the military who were making prosthetics and really spreading their knowledge of building with the greater community. By being open, we are also creating value, from education to research to the productization in business of the benefits of these tools. We are creating real value. And we can create value using open source projects and hardware. And a good evidence of that is the company that Limor Fried built around Adafruit. They've been open from the beginning, open hardware, open source software, open prints, open education tutorials, and they're also a highly successful company. And so it is possible to find business models that work with open source, and we need to do more of that. One of the things that's near and dear to my heart is getting different disciplines of researchers together to collaborate for cures. In 2005, those were my two kids and my mom at the Duke Gardens, and at that point, my mom was probably a year into being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. In 2013, after an 8-year journey, there was still optimism and hope for a future cure, that somebody else wouldn't have to watch their loved ones lose their verbal ability, their ability to remember. Now, on the upside, my mom was really happy, even as she went through Alzheimer's. And it was finding different things that resonated with her. She's got that little Beanie Baby puppy. Things that were very tactile and soft really resonated with her. Me playing ukulele for her resonated with her. And my hope is that some of the wonderful things that we are doing here will be used to get us closer to a cure for Alzheimer's as well as other illnesses. And it's just cool to see something like the Canadian Open Neuroscience Platform use Jupyter Book, thank you Chris Holdgraf, Binder, Jupyter Hub, Jupyter, Pandas, SciPy, scikit-learn, Matplotlib, NumPy, and Seaborn to have an open collaboration about the information that is known about Alzheimer's. And I am sure this is happening in other places as well, and I hope it will continue to accelerate. All these slides are already up on Speaker Deck too. So, have I been off by one the whole time? No. Okay, good. So as I start to wrap this up, I was like, am I programming in Julia, not Python? Okay, so acting intentionally with ethics, privacy, equity, and humanity, there are things we can change as individuals, and there are things that it's going to take a group of us to change. But I think some of the steps that we can do as individuals is choose to always open information by default. And, you know, barring privacy concerns, things like that. By avoiding opaque information, we're building trust among other researchers, users of our software, and also the businesses that are trying to adopt these tools. Speaking of businesses, we should proceed cautiously with some of the pseudo-open source projects. Some of the things that, while perhaps convenient, cut into the ability for us to do reproducible science. So I'm not saying these tools don't have a place, but the place may not be within that science tool chain. By planning, having a plan, making a plan, executing the plan, and changing the plan as needed, you will strengthen your projects. One of the things we've done on Binder and Jupyter Hub is made a Team Compass repo which is basically our way of communicating with each other about things like roadmaps, meetings, policies, onboarding new users, whatever sort of comes up at the time. And it's been an evolution, and I leave you those resources as well. And I think Jupyter Lab has also adopted the Team Compass approach as well. So it seems to be working. Now, money, money, money. It's important to us. We want to be able to eat. We want to be able to do the research that we want. And one suggestion I have for you is, for those of you that like economics, or those of you that just like reading about funding open source, Jean Tirole not only is an amazing economist, but he is a gifted writer. There are at least 5 chapters on the digital economy and open source. There's a number of chapters on being a researcher in today's digital economy. And I highly encourage you to read it, or if it's too long, there's also a link to a interview that he gave, which is like the summarized version, and I think that link will be on the slide deck that's posted. So, for business and industry, choose your own open source inventor. It's good that you're using open source tools even without investment back into the community. Having users makes our projects more successful. It's better if you can make a public relations-driven, minimum viable investment back to the project, even just to make your own company look good. But better yet, contribute an ethical amount of your gained value back, whether it's in dollars, resources, or personnel. For project maintainers, make your project citable using JOS, Jose, other open journals, or even closed journals. We've got to be better at measuring the impact that our projects are having on discovery. And hopefully in the sprints, we can start some of that. We need to develop best practices on soliciting funding from philanthropies, grants, and industry, and share them across projects so that we're not reinventing the wheel each time. We have tools to do templates and things like that. We should be taking advantage of those more than we are. And perhaps most importantly for project maintainers is that you practice self-care to avoid the alligators of burnout, because the insidious thing about burnout is once you realize that you have it, it's too late. It's been kind of building for a while. So look at your teammates and say, hey, how you doing? Do you want to take a break? Whatever, just check in with them because it's important. Extract the hidden value in obvious insights. There was a paper this month in the Sloan Management Review that a person actually went and looked at sort of things that were absolutely obvious and what impact they had. And one of the things that he would have never predicted was if you meet a single person who benefited from your work and they tell you they've benefited from your work, it actually is enough to double your effort and triple your productivity, which I think is pretty cool. So when anybody comes up and tells me like, hey, I've used Jupyter, or I've used it in my classroom, or any of those things, it's a great feeling. And I think all of you have projects where those feelings can be put to use. And then last, focus on your impact, what you can do as an individual with the time and energy that you have. And what are you going to do to keep your work open and accessible to many? So if I look forward to 2024, I have no idea what is going to happen. There's lots of uncertainty. But what I do know is that if we're always open, if we're sharing information, we're continuing with the great work that we're doing with learning and discovery, society will benefit. And that's important because the next generation of scientists are out there. The impact of our work touches their learning and discovery. So I urge you to together take the collective and connected knowledge and energy in this room and apply it. Apply it to real-world problems. And I am confident that everyone will succeed in improving the world. Thank you. I should clap for you guys. I have one more prop. CS, but it should really say science for all. Thank you, you are too kind. And really, this community has been the best thing, other than my children and my husband, that I've done in my entire life. And I am a better person from having worked with many of you that I know, and hopefully those of you that I have not met personally, I will in the future. So, yeah, so have a great rest of the conference.
So we have time for questions. If anyone, if you could raise your hand. We actually have a couple of microphones.
Thank you.
Someone wants
I've used Jupyter Notebook in my work, and it helps. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Could you expound a bit on the pseudo-open you're talking? I'm not asking you to name names, but just conceptually, what are you referring to?
Yeah, you know, businesses are there to make a profit. If they're public corporations, they have fiduciary duty to their shareholders to increase profitability. And as such, one of their motivations is to gain market share, gain profitable business, and to, you know, do that. Oftentimes, they will do things that are suitable for their customers. And those things are not wrong or bad, they're just different. But if, in doing so, the underlying visibility of what is open within open projects, so for example, like somebody takes, I don't know, binder and makes their own binder, if they don't let you kind of put your own dependencies in and see what dependencies are at the core container, it's not really reproducible science. And that's really what I mean about pseudo-open. Good question, though.
Hi.
Hi.
This might not be totally coherent, but...
I don't think my talk was, so
oh, no, it's
no worries.
fantastic. How do you work that line between like community stuff and technical stuff? Because you know, like you need the one for the credibility for the other, but like, and there's a pull and...
Yes, no, it makes complete sense. And in short, I don't know the perfect answer. I guess as an individual, I think sometimes it's hard to do that. Because we have our own personal interests, and some of us have different skill sets than others. And I'm going to call out somebody. Shauna, stand up, because Shauna's going to be at the sprints. Shauna and I worked together on a nonprofit called Open Hatch, which was there for helping people learn how to contribute to open source software before GitHub had guides and things like that. And we would go to college campuses and have people make their first pull requests. Shauna is a good coder. She's an amazing community manager, engager, motivator. She's an inspiration. And I think within our projects, what we need to try and do are find diverse sets of people that have different skills. I could write code. I love writing documentation. You know, it's sort of a weird skill, but you kind of need to know the technical side to write the documentation. But not always. Like, you wouldn't want me designing a logo because it would be like a stick man or woman or person. And so I don't have an easy answer for that, but I think it is like recognizing people have different talents than you. We may be great scientists or great coders. That doesn't mean we're great project managers or designers. So recognize that we need other disciplines. And maybe it's something that, as a collective group, we hire grant writers or hire a designer or hire a community manager. So I hope that helped a little bit. There's that uncertainty again, which is why if folks have things they've tried that has worked, publish it, put it in a document, share it. All right. Oh.
Hey, Carol.
Hi, David.
Sort of a follow-up to John's questions. A decade ago or 2 decades ago, the main form of this pseudo-open was often, to sort of name names, embrace, extend, extinguish as a paradigm for a certain company especially, but maybe others.
Yes.
Interacting with open source.
Yes.
And I feel like the terrain has shifted somewhat there. Certainly companies are self-interested and want to, advance their own vision of where software should go, but it feels like we've at least moved past some of that danger, but maybe I'm just not seeing things I should.
Well, I think you're right, and I think, this book would do much more justice than I could to that, but I think the larger corporations definitely have an interest and are contributing to open source. And it is a lot better than the years in the early 90s of proprietary and how many different flavors of Unix can you have and have to port your project to. A lot. And so I think, part of it is helping them realize that open for reproducibility is important. And if it's not open, then, be very upfront that it's not open. Because some folks have not been quite as upfront as others.
I think we have time for one more question, Gil. No? Oh, you're just holding it, okay. One more question? No.
What advice would you have for all of us to help fund the open source efforts?
I think what I had mentioned in the project, in the last few slides, which was as projects, write a paper so your project can be cited. Share knowledge, like if you've gotten a contract through DOE, share how you did it, what the process is. I mean, you don't necessarily have to put your whole proposal up there, but even like a checklist, like, contact XYZ, follow up with whoever. And I think that helps. It's the sharing of information. And because when we're busy doing our research and the science and building our tools, we don't often have time to do the legwork and research on the strategic things like funding and actual grant writing that would help us. So what we need to do is sort of be smarter with what we have and sort of scale it out to others. And that's pretty much what I got.
All right, let's thank Carol one more time.
Thank you all.